TMNT is something of a conundrum for me. It excels in its visuals, its action, and very often in atmosphere. It has a good handle on the characterizations of half of its characters at least. The voice acting is spot on for well over half of its characters. It has a sense of adventure and it's usually visually entertaining. But man, is this one of the dullest, easiest, most contrived villain plots I've ever seen. In lameness factor, it's up there with Turtles 3 and Superman 3. Which just makes me scratch my head because there's a really competent team behind this movie. The dialogue is generally well written, the story is well paced, and the plot isn't badly crafted really, it's just bad. I never like to try to rewrite a story in a review. The professional thing is to look at what's here and judge it on its own merits, rather than talk about what I wish had been done. But after this generic, boring story about a 3,000-year-old warrior king who's waiting for planets to align so he can capture the 13 monsters he let out of an interdimensional portal and make his stone brothers human again, I miss the Shredder so much. I start thinking about all the established characters that would have been fun to see on the big screen, and I think, well, if it has to be stuff from another dimension, why not just do a more serious version of Krang from Dimension X? And the reason my mind goes there is because the people making this movie know how to make a good movie. They know what excites an audience visually. They know what their fans want to see. They know we want to see that rivalry between Raphael and Leonardo come out, and that's brilliantly executed. So if only they had the story to back their production, this could have been something really special for Turtles fans. As it stands, it's watchable, but it leaves a lot to be desired. It has two big strikes going against it from the get-go. One, as I mentioned, is the villain plot, and it isn't just that it's kind of lame and generic, but it screams video game story. Lawrence Fishburne's opening narration sequence looks and sounds just like the opening cinematic of any modern action game. Having to deal with 13 monsters immediately sounds like a formula for video game levels. And look at the costume and helmet designs for these soldiers, the landscapes, the portal. This thing looks like every video game ever. And that's not surprising since the writer and director of the film, Kevin Munroe, has done a lot of video game animation before this. It seems like the producers were at a loss for the overarching story. They knew they wanted to do a story about the Turtles being estranged and give it a strong family element. But the immortal Winters and his Brotherhood of Stone Warriors never really jives with these ideas. It's really trying, though. There's a bit of a parallel between Winter's brothers and the Turtles, when we find that Winter's brothers never valued his family ideals as he does, and they turn on him, deciding that being immortal is more important than being a family, whereas the Turtles learn to put their differences aside and put their family first, though Michelangelo and Donatello are kind of just along for the ride and don't really have any differences. The lessons to learn are exclusively for Leonardo and Raphael. But this parallel is never fully realized and feels very tacked on. Ultimately, for me, Winter's story and the Turtles' story are two separate and hardly belong in the same movie. The Turtles get caught up in this plot because these stone guys are wreaking havoc on the city, the monsters are too, and by the third act, Leonardo gets captured as a decoy for one of the monsters, so the Stone Brothers can double-cross Winters. But Winters isn't really a force to be reckoned with. He's got his obsession, and it hardly involves the Turtles. He's not really a villain so much as a man who made a mistake 3,000 years ago, and its consequences are affecting everyone. He's played up as the sympathetic villain, but he's this immoral guy out of time who we can hardly relate to. He would have been more interesting if he was doing something more menacing with his obsession. What's so bad about trying to capture scary monsters, open a portal, help your family, and become mortal again? He's not even a misguided, sympathetic villain. Then you've got his brothers, which are two-dimensional and stereotypical, immortals who crave more power. Maybe they're the real villains, but what they do is so expected they're easily ignored. Just excuses to have the Turtles fight someone. The monsters do the same thing, and they're also irritating because it's never explained why they're just around and why nobody really talks about them for 3,000 years. And since the movie is going for more of a comic book feel than some of the previous theatrical installments, more street-level city stuff, all this supernatural and magic stuff feels out of place, as do the Foot Ninja. They're reduced to hired guns since the Shredder's death, which is played up as being strangely sad, and I like that, but I can't help but think they should have been the main threat. The weirdest thing is how the movie itself sometimes seems as put off by this as Turtles fans are bound to be. It's very apologetic about it, trying to convince us this plot with the Stone Warriors and monsters is cool in the opening narration by calling it a greater evil than the Shredder. We're sorry Shredder's not going to be in this, really, but don't worry, what we've got is better. It can't convince the audience of this, and it can't convince itself of it either. Toward the very end, it tries to throw us a bone by having the Foot's new leader, Karai, give us this vague promise of things to come. She and the Foot find themselves in the position of having to help the Turtles defeat the Stone Warriors, and afterwards she says, "Soon we will have further business together." The kind that involves familiar faces from your past. Of course, the Turtles all look at each other wide-eyed, thinking she's talking about the Shredder. But of course, nothing ever comes of that because they didn't make a sequel, and it doesn't even feel like setup for a sequel so much as just reminding us that this is still the Turtles universe, since this whole winter story got us so far away from the familiar stuff Turtles fans want to see. The other strike against it is how it's impossible to tell how much time has passed between the death of Shredder and these events. And I don't want to make a big deal out of continuity or anything, other than to briefly mention that it sometimes seems to be in the live-action film continuity, but April, Casey, and Splinter seem like entirely different characters. It's a strange amalgam of different Turtles universes. It's got elements from the movies and from the most recent animated series, which seems to be the closest versions to this April and Casey. I can get past the idea that this movie is its own universe, in which similar things have happened that we've seen in other versions, the death of Shredder, maybe the finding of the ooze canister, etc. But this has the feel of other late sequels, like Rocky or Indiana Jones, where the hero's glory days are over and then something happens and they have to come back for another adventure. And once again, wouldn't it have been better if the villain plot had brought the Turtles back together rather than them coincidentally happening upon it after Leonardo's return from his training in the jungle? But regardless, I want to know how old they are here. Are they even still teenagers? Did their glory days just happen all in the span of like 2 years, and then Leonardo took off for a year, and now they're all scraping by, Donatello running a computer helpline, Michelangelo doing kids' birthday parties, and Raphael, with the coolest idea by far in the film, fighting crime as a vigilante called Night Watcher. That's the only possible explanation for why April and Casey look so young, and even still, they both look like 20. So if you take this as a standalone film, none of this matters. It's a story about heroes who have been out of the fight for a while and have to learn how to be a team again. Okay, but it feels like such a sequel, and if you have any Turtles background at all, it's a little confounding. Now, I like to look at movies as they stand on their own, not just as a fan, but consider the fact that the producers feel Ninja Turtles is universal and well-known enough that they can sell the film under a title that simply is the Turtles acronym, TMNT, and the assumption is that most people who will watch this have that background. I can't be the only one questioning April being a ninja/archaeologist with no mention whatsoever of her reporter career, or Splinter's slurred accent, or the fact that the Turtles seem to be differently aged. Splinter calls Leonardo the elder brother, and Leonardo calls Michelangelo his little brother. Before, I always thought they were the same age. So if we look at this as a standalone movie, are these problems? No, not really, but they're certainly distracting. On a side note, I'd like to mention a subtle thing that strikes me as cool imagery, but I'm not sure it's intentional. I noticed a lot of late 80s, early 90s stuff in the Turtles' lair, like arcade machines and some old TVs. These could just be things they found on the street, but wherever they got them and however long they've had them, I wonder if this is the filmmakers making a statement about the Turtles themselves. I wonder if they're saying that while the Turtles are still quite popular, they're perpetually stuck in the era they were created. They'll always be a product of the late 80s. If so, I really like that. So what else does the film have going for it with such a dismal A story? Fantastic animation, especially the fight between Raphael and Leonardo, which is one of the best animated rain sequences I think I've ever seen, and it's well choreographed. It goes on for quite a while, and I could have stood quite a while longer. The Turtles are stealthy, they move fast and in the shadows. They feel like real ninjas here. I didn't care for the character designs originally, but they work fine in the context of the movie. The relationship between Leonardo and Raphael is the best thing about the film. These characters are both a little more complex than we've seen them in previous installments. I love what's done with this relationship in the first movie, but here, Raphael has a real point, and Leonardo isn't entirely in the right. Leonardo is arrogant and has a sense of false modesty. He tries to care only about the team and being a better leader, but he's very speechy and takes the moral high ground on everything. Raphael gets impatient with his lectures and doesn't see how Leonardo is any more mature than any of the rest of them. And when Leonardo says, "I'm better than you," it's clear that he hasn't learned as much in his training as he thought he had. Sure, Raphael is an impatient hothead, but he's also the only one of the four of them that has made any kind of difference in the last year, out actually fighting crime and trying to help people. He's as sympathetic as he's ever been, and this rivalry is so well constructed. It's hard to believe that the same people who came up with the Winters plot did this with these characters. Donatello and Michelangelo, as per usual, are somewhat shafted, though each gets their moments. Michelangelo's characterization is questionable to me. He's still the comic relief, and he's still got that goofball party dude thing going on, but he's also played up as socially inept and kind of a moron. Sometimes it's funny, but often it's just irritating. Donatello is in his usual role of computer geek and expert machinist, which is utilized well toward the end, but he doesn't get much development beyond complaining about Raphael's apparent laziness toward the beginning. Raphael going out as Night Watcher provides a much-needed superhero angle and helps give the movie a real comic book feel. There's a scene toward the beginning where he catches a gang stealing electronics that's refreshingly Saturday morning cartoon. I'd go as far to say that I would have enjoyed a Night Watcher-centered film, with the other turtles largely in the background, but that's possibly because not nearly enough is done with the rest, and this is the one original inspired thing that shines. I did find myself scratching my head at the fact that Casey Jones, who's played here as a klutz and sometimes a little slow on the uptake, finds it pretty obvious that Raphael is Night Watcher. When they have a confrontation and he reveals this to Raph is surprised and Casey just says, "Well, you look like a big metal turtle." But Leonardo, who is a big turtle, is totally surprised when Raphael reveals himself to him. There are some nice bits of stunt casting, like Sarah Michelle Gellar as April and Patrick Stewart as Winters, but their talents are somewhat wasted, especially Stewart's. And I was totally baffled as to why you'd get someone like Lawrence Fishburne for your narrator and only give him 2 minutes worth of lines. I figured he'd at least come back and bookend the film. So I'm going to give TMNT a 2 out of 4. What it does well, it does really well. But the story itself is lame, and the good characterizations are too far in the background and are tempered with other bad characterizations. It has a couple of scenes that are wonderfully realized, but they can't quite elevate it over an average score.
Ba, ba,